Get us going. So welcome everyone to the Wednesday, February 17th, 2021 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. We will conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 938-5500-0747. We have a very full agenda tonight, so I'm just going to get us, have us dive straight in. So if Kayla, if you could please call the roll.
Thank you, Molly. And I want to make a quick announcement to welcome our newest Transportation Commission member. So thank you, Wanwoo Lee, who will be joining the Transportation Commission as a voting member and as designee for the City Planning Commission. So thank you, Wanwoo. And I'll also note that we have received regrets from the following commissioners who are not able to join us this evening: Nicholas Hutchinson, Steve Dolan, and Liz Margolis, who has a conflicting Board of Education meeting tonight. I will now call the roll. Please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Balderrama.
Here.
Commissioner Boland.
Here.
Councilmember Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Commissioner Hadumaki.
Here.
Commissioner Hull.
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Parsons.
Here.
Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Summers.
Here.
Commissioner Hess.
Here.
Lieutenant Sherba.
Here.
Commissioner Stupka. We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. So next, are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Okay, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Boland.
Boland. Seconded Balderrama. All those in favor, physically raise hands. All those opposed? Any abstentions? And the consent agenda passes. Now we're going to move on to the public comment period. This is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 938-5500-0747. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Kayla, do we have any public commenters tonight?
We do.
Great.
Phone number ending in 768. I will now unmute you. I will allow you to speak, and you will just need to unmute yourself. And please go ahead with your comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Oh, great. Hi, my name is Megan Burvan, and I live in Ward 1. I just wanted to call in and say that I'm super excited to hear the discussion about sidewalk snow removal tonight. I'm from South Carolina originally, and I moved up north in 2015 because I hate the heat. And I do like the cold, but the whole dealing with snow in the winter thing is pretty new to me. And it kind of blew my mind when I figured out that property owners, are responsible for removing the snow. I think that if we are paying to remove snow from the roads, we should be doing it for the sidewalks as well. I don't really see why we make a distinction there. I live really close to the Border to Border Trail, and their snow removal isn't perfect, but it's pretty good compared to a lot of the rest of the city. So being able to trust that I will have relatively clear sidewalks when I want to go for a run or a bike ride has been really important to me during COVID when I need to be able to get outside. Apart from that, I'm a year-round bike commuter, so maintaining non-car infrastructure is really important to me. I walk or bike most everywhere, so I'm super excited that this conversation is really gaining steam, and I look forward to hearing the discussion tonight. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That is our only public participant at this time.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And thank you, Megan, for your comment. So moving on to information and discussion, we now invite City Planner Alexis Lee to provide a presentation on transit-supported zoning.
Alexis, would you like the memo that you shared with the commission to be pulled up on screen, or do you have any other? If you'd like to share your screen, you have permission to do that. Oh, great. Thank you.
Help me out for a second. Are you seeing City of Ann Arbor Transportation Planning or City of Ann Arbor Transportation Commission?
Right now, we see the slide that says new zoning district TC1 transit corridor.
Got it. Okay, then I think we are cooking with gas. Okay, here we go. Good evening. Thanks for letting me present an update on our planning initiative to create a new zoning district. I am Alexis Lee. I'll be spending a minute getting everyone up to speed, and then I have some things I'd like your feedback. First, planning staff has been working to create a new mixed-use zoning district for a little while now. It is intended for corridors that already have regular AAA TA service. The new district will implement the recommendations in most of the master plan elements. Here's a sample from the non-motorized transportation plan. Note the graphics use the Washtenaw 23 interchange as an example. Here's another example of how most master plan elements address the benefits of mixed use districts. Let me be clear that we actually have 9 mixed use districts already. Here's on the left is a little snip from the use table of the UDC. And then I've blown up a little bit, some key information on the right. You can see that each district allows the full spectrum of residential from single family to multifamily. What this project will do is create a 10th mixed use district. However, this district will have specific standards with the intention of getting more than what we are currently seeing. The problem isn't so much that we don't allow mixed uses, because we do. The problem is more that we don't require mixed uses or have minimum thresholds for new development. To create the new district, we're borrowing from the good bits of our existing districts. Our draft takes the permitted uses of the D2 downtown interface and the C1 districts, the placement standards from the D2 downtown districts and the O office district, and the form-based standards like in the downtown district character overlay zones. And about half of our permitted uses already have some sort of use specific standards, so it's an established practice already. There are some common components to any zoning district. Each has an intent statement that describes the what, where, and why for each district. We'll be finalizing an intent statement, but we're going to be using phrases like you see on the screen: facilitate, encourage, and support redevelopment and infill. It's intended along existing transit corridors with regular fixed service. It will further the goals expressed in the elements of the master plan. Another common component of any zoning district is permitted uses. As I mentioned, this draft for TC1, for Transit Corridor 1, are generally based on the D and the C2B, C3 districts, but we will be excluding those uses that are solely vehicle oriented. Use specific standards are a common component of code. With the TC1 district, we will have some very specific use standards to ensure that we're getting the uses and the physical form of development we want. I'll be asking for feedback and comments about requiring residential uses, so this line is not finalized at all. But you can see if there is a requirement, this is the place it will be found. There definitely will be building design and site design standards in this district, and perhaps some special parking regulations, and so on and so forth. Here's an example of the kind of development that we want to see. We're not looking for high rises, but we are looking for a decent bit of density, a good streetscape, and either a mix of uses or the potential to at least have mix of uses, a more flexible space that can evolve over time. We're kind of hoping to transform some of our corridors, like you can, this is not Ann Arbor, but you can imagine this could be the Eisenhower State intersection on the upper left. And we'd like to move it more towards the lower right to get more on our transit corridors. So that kind of concludes my presentation here. Happy to answer any technical questions or clarification. I do speak kind of fast. But then I'd also like to hear some of your feedbacks and comments, being the Transportation Commission. I'm interested to know if you would have thoughts about if this should be intended for a certain area of the city, a certain transit corridor, or should it be more citywide? I'll say that we had originally written it for the State and Eisenhower transit corridor. And that's why we picked TC1, thinking that when this gets off, we can have maybe a TC2 for, I'll randomly say Washtenaw, and maybe a TC3 for Stadium, West Stadium. Alternatively, we can just have TC, and it could be not so targeted initially. It could be more broadly applicable initially. Also, we heard at a Planning Commission working session that some folks raised the point of, will curb cuts be restricted? Will we have, I'm blanking on the word, but it's access management. Will this district have access management? Will there be roadway improvements that are needed adjacent to these new developments? Also, what we heard was about achieving more parity in transportation modes. A criticism was we are really focused on bus access, and this could be just as beneficial for other forms of non-motorized transportation like bikes. I mentioned a little bit the mixed use requirements. We kind of thought, well, we're not getting mixed use. All of our districts allow mixed use, but a lot of these transit corridors, and when I mentioned that, I'm thinking South State, Eisenhower, Washtenaw, Plymouth, West Stadium, a little bit, some areas of Jackson Road, South Main, Ann Arbor, Saline. They allow mixed uses, but we generally have single use developments. Should we require mixed uses? Alternatively, maybe not require mixed uses, but maybe require a minimum amount of development. And then finally, as a Transportation Commission, are there critical design features that we need to require in these developments for success? Off the top of my head, I'm thinking, do we need bus pull-offs for everyone or sometimes? Do we need to dedicate spots for delivery services and car sharing services? Because if this is easier for transit access, probably it's also going to not have as many car ownerships. So do we need to provide that level or make sure that level of service and that those accommodations are there? Maybe what other things would be good to have, but maybe or not should be required with development? Anyway, I'll stop. But these are the kind of things I'm interested in hearing what you may have to say as we refine the ordinance and craft this district.
Great, thank you so much. I'm not cutting you off, right? Was that the end?
Nope, that's then.
Okay. So if you could stop sharing your screen so I can see hands. We've got I think about 10 minutes, 12 minutes for questions and comments. So I'm going to ask people to physically raise their hands, and Commissioner Felds, I see you already, so you can go first.
Just as far as feedback for what could be required, I think that curb usage is one of the big issues for the future. And you did mention that, but I think that particularly with this type of a zoning area, you need to have provisions for all of that, plus the bike parking, buses, drop-offs, Lyft, Ubers, all the whole thing. I think curbside is becoming one of the more contested issues as far as land use. So I would put requirements in there, and there isn't a whole lot already established. Even, national standards or best practices, as far as I'm aware.
No, there's not. It's an emerging field, but I do appreciate the feedback, and I agree.
Commissioner Hadamaki, and then Parsons.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with some other sentiment that it needs the transit needs to be focused more on just, in this case, AAA TA, where I do like the requirement that you mentioned of bus pull-offs as part of the project. But in this case, the bike infrastructure on this corridor is very high stress. It's pretty poor. So I would really like to see addressing the bike infrastructure as kind of a required part of this effort, not just flipping zoning designations on lots, but to do infrastructure work. It's a quick question. So it comes across as almost a pilot, like a pilot zoning program. Is it considered a pilot? Are other corridors going to wait to see results from this, or I just worry, like, how long is it going to take to really see redevelopment in this corridor, since a lot of the buildings are fairly new, a lot of new office buildings and that kind of thing. So I just worry that, or wonder if other corridors to be zoned TC would want to wait and see how this goes.
We were first thinking fairly more narrow, tailoring the setbacks, height, any buffering for state and Eisenhower. But a comment that we heard, a popular comment was, go bigger, you can do better, and it should be applicable to everywhere. And we can do that. But in general, we were thinking, we're going to get the zoning district on the books, and then it would be for landowners to apply for rezoning. And if they meet the criteria, the locational criteria, we'd approve a rezoning. I know that there's a lot of new development, especially in state and Eisenhower, a lot of office development there, but there's also a lot of surface parking, and there's a lot of front yard. And we are trying to craft the floor area ratio, the height limits, setbacks, so that it'll be more infill. We're not expecting tear down. We'd like to try to work with what they already have and just create that space where they could put that density on an existing and commingle, if you will. So it would be on the books. It would be up to landowners. We were not contemplating city initiated rezonings, and we're also trying to craft it so that it would work around the existing development. Oh, and I think I did say that we had one spot in mind, but the comments were, nope, make it a generic district and have anybody who meets the transit corridor criteria that we established have citywide be fair game. I'm wondering what the Transportation Commission's thoughts on that too. That was the Planning Commission is, I think, undecided yet, but the feedback from the working session and with our citizen and resident commentary was pretty clear that it should be broad.
Thank you. So Commissioner Parsons.
Well, yeah, this is actually a perfect segue. I was going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the pros and cons of focusing on state and Eisenhower versus going broader. There's a lot of corridors where I would like to see this happen, and I think it'd be to the benefit of the city. For instance, Packard and Platt and Washtenaw near Huron are two locales. So I have a follow-up question, but already. But maybe you could talk about the pros and cons. Why is it better to go with State and Eisenhower versus doing a broader opening of this zoning?
A couple of the pros and cons are all just what are your personal priorities and what are your values. I think as staff, we were thinking start small, go for incremental change. I'm not perhaps thinking that so much anymore, but we were thinking start small, get it right, an opportunity to make it better if what we're getting is not exactly what we thought. So that is both a pro and a con. We picked State and Eisenhower because it's the most single use of our transit corridors. It's really heavy office there, so huge employment center, but there's very little residential there. And the mall has commercial, but very little residential. Other corridors, even Washtenaw, but Packard and Platt, West Stadium, they actually have a little bit better mixed use. It's not all in the same lot, but there is residential that's closer to them. There's more retail closer. So we thought that State and Eisenhower actually needed the shot in the arm the most because it's the most single use, but your comment was verbatim from what we heard a lot was, why limit yourself there? Let's just make it a citywide every corridor.
And I think that dovetails into my sort of follow-up. State and Eisenhower, let's just be honest, it's sort of a weird spot where I can understand why there are businesses as opposed to residential, just with the interchanges and not very kind infrastructure for people on bikes or wheelchairs or mobility devices or walking. But Washtenaw and Platt seem to be corridors that could be have a very big impact very quickly in the infill, as you described. And so that infill that I'm curious about, and this is the specific question, when I look at plot maps and look at these corridors, it seems to me that a lot of the parking, for instance, along Packard, it's actually St. Aubin. Is that a public right of way? Is that a street, or is that just taken over by parking? And similar for Washtenaw, just to the east of Huron, it seems like that's just been a public roadway that's been taken over by parking. So how much of that is city owned? How much freedom do we have to actually tweak those corridors or play with those corridors as we start to develop sort of the larger vision that I think we all like and support along these corridors?
Those both, that stretch of Packard and that south side of Washtenaw does have a full street next to the street. It's now used parking in the city right of way. I think that their legacies, on Packard, I think it's a legacy of the city of East Ann Arbor, but I can't vouch for that. Moving forward, on Washtenaw, you might be able to visualize it's a lot of it zoned some sort of C district. The development is actually sort of what we want. There is the buildings right up to that service road, parking, zero setback, buildings all lined up like nice straight teeth. I feel like its main problem is it's single story, and it's single story, and it was just redeveloped. It's across from Arborland, but they knocked it, and it has a big parking lot in front of it. I think that the right of way, the extra wide right of way, stops there. But the commercial districts right now require a setback, so I think that's why Allstate Billiards is sort of way back, because it redeveloped, and we made them take the building from right at the edge of the right of way, push it farther back, put a parking lot in front. It's single story. The other end of that stretch, big commercial project, redeveloped, single story, big parking lot in front. If we could get them to be 3 stories, we think it's a win-win. But that existing commercial district, and it's a hodgepodge of districts, if we offer up a single zoning district that'll work from end to end, that has uniform setbacks and room in the development standards to allow that second and third story. If we take away some of the parking requirement, maybe, so that's not a barrier, we can use that public parking. But we think that's what sort of the benefit, and that's how we think it should sort of evolve. Get a second story, third story, maybe fourth story there. We think it could be a win-win.
So just to clarify, and I thank you for that. Sorry,
Commissioner
Mom.
Parsons, I'm
Oh,
trying
sure.
to be really rigid on time tonight because we
Okay.
have a
Yep,
very
that's
packed
fine.
agenda. For everyone, if you have further questions or feedback, can we send that to you, Kayla, to forward on? I have a few answers to some of those questions that I'll be sending by email. So that works.
That's great. Yes, you
Okay.
can send that feedback to me and I'll get it to Alexis.
So Commissioner Lee, did you have one quick thing? Or?
Yeah, this is really quick. I didn't know a good time for me to jump in, but I'm only here for note-taking capacity. It's my first day, so it's nice to meet all of you. I work at Oxford, which owns the 777 building on State and Eisenhower. So as far as this discussion goes, I'm here for note-taking capacity to kind of communicate Transportation Commission. I just won't be engaging on it on a substantive basis and technically recusing myself from it. So hello to everybody. I just needed to make that. I didn't know when was a good time to interject that, but just a big disclaimer on that front. But this is a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. And thank you so much for letting us know about that. So I'm just going to keep us flying right through. Thank you so much again, Alexis, for that presentation. It was really helpful. I know a lot of us are really excited about the potential for transit-oriented zoning in the city to improve our corridors. So next we are going to invite, oh yeah, thanks. Next we're going to invite Kayla Coleman to lead a discussion about equitable engagement.
Great, thank you. All right. Let me share screen. And please let me know. I'm hoping that you are seeing a slide that says equitable engagement, February 17th.
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's jump in because got a lot to cover here. It's a big topic and a small amount of time relative to the magnitude of this discussion. So I wanted to just mention a couple of disclaimers before I jump in. That one, I have been asked to frame this discussion with the Transportation Commission about equitable engagement. I've been a community engagement specialist with the City of Ann Arbor for well, I've been working with the city for the last decade and I've been working on community engagement for most of that time, but I'm not an expert in equity. So I'm going to frame the discussion and get us started here, but I just want to be clear about my credentials for discussing equity. I also want to note that I work in the public services area, and that is one service area of the City of Ann Arbor, and I'll be sharing primarily a snapshot of what the public services area is doing relative to equitable community engagement, but this should not be taken as a comprehensive representation of all the work that the City of Ann Arbor is doing. I'm sure there's other great work in other departments and parts of the city that are not reflected here. So what are we going to talk about? We'll cover some basics, some of that terminology, at least opening discussion on what is community engagement, equity, equitable engagement, talking a bit about the current state of work in City of Ann Arbor, what are we doing now, and future work, where could we be doing better, what opportunities exist for more equitable, inclusive engagement, and your role as a transportation commissioner and how you can help, and hopefully some time for questions and discussion. So first, why are we talking about equity? So I just want to pause here and think about why this is an important topic for us today. I think that it's apparent and undeniable that the state of racism and inequity in our communities and in our institutions is more apparent now than ever, and it's time to start making changes. So we can all think of personal stories where we've experienced inequity, where we have witnessed inequity, and I think just try to keep those in mind as we talk tonight about reflecting on what you have experienced and also where you see your role in the future and how you can shape a more equitable future. I also think it's really important that if we're going to start a conversation about equity, that we think about our Indigenous communities. So I'll take a moment to do a land acknowledgement and recognize that the land the City of Ann Arbor currently occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe. including Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, and Wyandot peoples. The unconscionable taking of land has had ongoing consequences, and so that brings us to the start of our discussion today about equity. So I'm hoping you can see this and it's not all blocked by the Zoom controls, but what the top of the slide there says is what is community engagement? Community engagement is about public involvement in the decision-making process. It can take many forms. You can see some of the images there, and it can range from conversations with the mayor, and this is the former city administrator, community workshops, community events. There are many ways where the public can be involved in the decision-making process. But as we think about that, it's important that we reflect on whether we've provided a transparent and inclusive decision-making process. And some of the considerations, because this gets us towards whether or not we are providing equitable engagement. So thinking about what that decision-making process is, has that been defined, and has it been clearly and transparently communicated? Who is involved in that process? Are there opportunities for feedback in ways that community input can really change the outcomes? And ultimately, who are the decision makers? So these are all important reflections as to whether an engagement process is equitable. Let's also think about who should be engaged. And the answer there is really anyone interested or affected by the outcome. So think broadly when we're thinking about engagement, but we should also remember, if we're considering whether engagement is equitable and who is participating, have we provided the resources and support that everyone needs to engage? So have we provided language translation services if needed? Maybe childcare, transportation, or locating our engagement events along transit corridors. Compensation for participant time, because time is valuable. Refreshments and food at engagement events. So we shouldn't assume that everyone who wants to participate in engagement is showing up. There may be things that we have not provided that would allow certain participants of the community to be able to participate, which sort of leads us into the discussion of what is equity. Okay, what is equity? So you may have seen this graphic before or something similar, and the top image shows equality. So in this image, everyone has received a bicycle, and it's the same bicycle, the same size, regardless of that person's size or their ability. And you'll see that some people are riding the bike comfortably, others are kind of struggling, and some are not riding at all. And the image on the bottom that shows equity, you see that each participant has now received a bicycle that fits their shape and size and allows them to comfortably participate. And let's think a little about who we are talking about in terms of equity. So you may have heard terms like historically marginalized groups, those previously excluded, or underrepresented voices. And I think it's good for us to, those terms are valuable, but also think, what does that really mean? So if anyone wants to jump in, try to make this an engaging presentation about engagement, is there anyone you can think of that is a voice that has been underrepresented in conversations in the city of Ann Arbor? Anyone can unmute and speak up.
Renters.
Great, thank you. Great example. Yes, so renters would be one demographic that has not been well represented. And we'll have some slides here in a moment to look a little closer on who we are hearing from and who we are not. But it's important to remember that everyone has a role to play. So we're not just talking about what do those people who have not been engaged, what do they need to do to become engaged? This is about everyone, all of our actions, and whether we're playing a role in continuing to exacerbate inequity, or whether we're making changes and taking action that make all members of the community more comfortable participating. So back to the question about who are we engaging? Who are those underrepresented voices? I want to take a closer look at that by reflecting on some demographic survey results. So this is a questionnaire that we use with City of Ann Arbor Public Engagement. we use it, at least I can say, in public services consistently, and we're tracking that data to get a better idea of who we're hearing from and who we're not hearing from, so we know who we need to make efforts to engage. It is always offered as an optional and anonymous part of a public engagement event or activity. I'm going to share some results from this, and two things I want to say. I'm going to compare it to some census data, and I just pulled some 2019 census data quick facts from Google. So those are the numbers I'm using. There may be better numbers out there, but it'll give us a rough idea for conversation. The other point I want to make is this is, again, public services data, and it represents about 7,000 responses, a little more than that, that we've tracked over the last couple of years. So that's the snapshot of what we're looking at. So when we've asked our public engagement participants, so that's the orange bar, is showing our public engagement participants to indicate which identifiers they would use to describe themselves, we see that 90% of our participants identify as white, whereas the census has indicated that around 70% of Ann Arbor's demographic is actually white. So our minority groups are underrepresented. You can see consistently these bar charts are showing a higher level of their actual representation in the community than what we are seeing in our public engagement. Similarly, with age, we see that younger demographics are not represented as well at public engagement. And although the older populations make up much smaller segments of the overall community, they are by far the highest level of engagement in our public participation events. This one is looking at household income. So what I found on the 2019 median household income for Ann Arbor, around $65,000. However, our public engagement participants show that more than 75% of our participants are above that median. This is the rent or own slide. So as Molly pointed, I think it was Molly, I actually couldn't see that who was speaking, but I think it was Molly who said renters are underrepresented. So the census showed that 45% of households in Ann Arbor are owner occupied. So I estimated around 55% are renters, and only 14% of our public engagement participants are renters. So renters are a huge portion of our community and are severely underrepresented in our community conversations. This is showing our gender identity, and there isn't a census benchmark on this slide, but I do want to point out it's clear that we have some work to do in engaging our LGBTQ community, and we need to provide an engagement environment that is comfortable and inclusive for all. So we talked a little about who we're hearing from, who we're not hearing from, but what is equitable community engagement? What can we do to get towards that? And in the next few slides, we're going to take a look at how are we advancing equity for the city of Ann Arbor. And one way is through our engagement formats and techniques. So you see here field trips, open houses, community workshops, on-street neighborhood meetings. And these are engagement formats that we've started shifting more towards, as opposed to something like a traditional town hall, which may have a speaker at the front of the room and an audience sitting in chairs facing them. The reason to transition to these other engagement formats is to make, as much as possible, a more conversational atmosphere where community participants can have one-on-one discussion with city staff, where people feel comfortable speaking up. They don't have to speak in front of loud audiences. Some participants may feel uncomfortable if they show up and the people that are leading the meeting don't look like them, or they speak a different native language. And being in an environment where you have to be put on the spot to speak in front of a bunch of people can be intimidating. So trying to make it comfortable. Open houses also provide the advantage of allowing participants to come and go at their leisure. So there's schedule flexibility advantages. Pop-up community workshops. This allows us to bring engagement events to locations where people are already existing, rather than asking them to come to us and work our engagement event into their schedule. So one example shown here is the Peace Neighborhood Center. This is where we held a pop-up community meeting for the Ann Arbor Transportation Master Plan. And that was one of our first I think it may have been the first time we worked with that particular neighborhood group, and we'd like to continue building those relationships and piggybacking on events that community centers are already holding, so that, again, we are bringing the engagement to people where they already are existing. Also thinking about how we're advancing equity through our digital engagement formats. So online surveys, we're using more and more of these. A2 Open City Hall is the city's standard platform for online surveys. And through these, we're able to achieve much higher response rate numbers than what we do through in-person meetings. And this provides an alternative for people who may not have the flexibility to attend a meeting in person, or even at a scheduled time on Zoom, for example, not in person, but digitally. Survey gives much more flexibility in when you participate. We're also using in-meeting polling. So there's a snapshot in the upper right of a poll that we offered in a recent Zoom meeting. And in-meeting polling allows for immediate feedback and anonymous responses. We also use these in in-person meetings. You may have seen the clickers that it's sort of a little remote that participants get handed during a meeting and can provide feedback that way. Again, it helps participants who may not feel comfortable speaking out or sharing their opinion publicly. They can give honest feedback without needing to put themselves in that position. Zoom is allowing us to meet digitally during these times of social distancing, and it's also something we can think about in our engagement strategies even after the pandemic. How can we continue offering a diverse range of engagement formats to meet everyone's needs? A2 Fix It, I want to mention as a way that we offer an opportunity for public to provide feedback to us. So still a level of engagement wherever there is a problem or a need that our public works department can address. And those get scheduled based on a basis of when they came in and the level of risk that they posed. So that's a great way that we provide equitable responses to community needs. I want to also think about our internal process and resource. So the City of Ann Arbor has a community engagement toolkit. This is what all City of Ann Arbor projects, policies, and programs use so that we can provide a thoughtful approach to our engagement strategy. It's a 5-step process. I won't go into it in detail in the interest of time, but one major aspect of this toolkit is the stakeholder worksheet. So we think about various stakeholder groups in the community and who needs to be engaged, who needs to have a voice in the conversation, so that we can promote the opportunity to all of those who are impacted by the decision that's being made. And some of the work that we've done recently is expansion to that stakeholder worksheet to include more community groups as we become aware of them, and also to flag particular groups that will help us reach an underrepresented voice. So those are brought to staff's attention at a higher level and are prioritized for promoting the engagement. Another way that we're advancing equity is through staff training. So City Council approved a contract with the International Association for Public Participation in 2019, and during 2020 and now continuing over to 2021, 50 staff are being trained in the 5-day program about effective public participation. So this has been a great way to enhance staff skills, knowledge, expertise, and a major focus of the program is thinking about engagement objectives and developing an engagement strategy that really is custom fit to the needs of a particular project, the community, and the decision makers, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach to engagement. So how can we improve? So I've talked a bit about what we're doing now, where I think we're making some progress, but of course there's still a lot of room where we can continue growing. So some of these tools that I talked about being used internally, I think that consistency across the organization is going to really be key to making progress here. So an expectation that all city departments use the community engagement toolkit for all projects will ensure that we are consistently developing a thoughtful engagement strategy. Using that demographic survey consistently will build our data so we can have a much better idea of who we're really hearing from. And we'll be able to compare what different parts of the city are seeing and maybe learn from each other on tools that we can try. A2 Open City Hall, I think establishing that as the consistent online survey platform for all city projects will help to ensure that the community knows where to go to participate and provide feedback in that way. We talked about needs for participation. So early on we said the language translation, childcare, transit, compensation, food and refreshments at public engagement events. These are things that we're not consistently doing right now, or we're not doing at all. And some of these we've spent some time researching. We've had some staff looking into child care services and looking at what other communities do during public engagement. And the next step is that we need to start working towards implementation of these. How we build relationships can also help us improve. So we have dozens of neighborhood associations, and we need to leverage those representatives as connectors to the community that they represent. There's also work being done in other cities that we can learn from. So Boulder has a Building Bridges program where there's actually community representatives being compensated to serve as the liaison between the city and some underrepresented demographic of the community that they haven't previously been able to get in touch with. So we can learn from that and start thinking about that. Of course, all of this takes resources. So that is needed. One example is as we're doing more online surveys and we're getting 10 times the results from one online survey that we would have gotten from one public meeting, we need staff and expertise to be able to review all of that data, analyze it, and make sure that we are being honest with the community and follow through on incorporating the feedback into the decision-making process. All right, communicate is a big way that we can continue to improve. And this is an example from Victoria, British Columbia. I love this example. I would love for us to get to this point someday where we're organized enough that we can present an entire year's worth of public engagement to our community and show a roadmap of all the engagement opportunities that are to come. So that's what's shown here. This is the 2018 Community Engagement Roadmap for Victoria. It's showing upcoming engagement, an approximation of when that will be conducted, and the level of engagement, whether inform, consult, empower, collaborate, different levels of how the community will be engaged. And there are other ways we can also improve our communications. One that I think is pretty attainable that we've also begun discussing and are closer to implementation on is having a landing page on our website, a2gov.org, that is specific for community engagement, a one-stop shop where the community knows where to go to see all of the upcoming public meetings, all of the currently open online surveys, and any other major initiatives that have an open engagement process. We also need to be asking the right questions. So this is an example from an event that the City of Ann Arbor's Give 365 program held in June of 2020. And they asked the question, what can the city do to promote racial equity? So I think having these conversations is a great step in the right direction. This is my last slide on improvements. So thinking about developing an equity-focused engagement strategy. This is work that is kicking off. We're just getting started on it. There will be an internal project team. There will be an external steering committee. We will be focusing on what equity and equitable engagement mean in Ann Arbor and what metrics should we be evaluating to measure that. So if you were following the council discussions from the February 1st meeting about an equity policy, this is sort of related to that. This is work that staff are currently actively working on. We can also continue looking to other cities, both for developing our equitable engagement strategy and other work. I mentioned Boulder already, but I'll also say Minneapolis has been a leader in their equitable engagement blueprint through their neighborhood and community relations department. The city of Durham has a neighborhood improvement services group. And so these are areas we can look to and learn from. Now, with all of that, let's wrap it up and think about what the Transportation Commission's role is in engagement. So, of course, well, I would start with, I guess, the existence of the Transportation Commission alone provides a public space for community discussion about transportation topics. So that alone brings visibility and public access to these conversations. We also offer public comment time during Transportation Commission meetings. So just as we had tonight, we heard from a community member who wanted to vocalize their interest in a particular transportation topic. Also, the Transportation Commission advises City Council, and that is on particular transportation efforts, but in addition to the engagement strategy for an engagement effort. And some examples have been the traffic calming program revisions, the 7th Street Committee, and the new Healthy Streets Committee all have focused on how community engagement was conducted or should be conducted in some way. So that feedback is welcomed. That advice to City Council and those conversations with staff go a long way in helping to improve the engagement strategies that are implemented. And the commissioners themselves. So each of you have a network that you are connected with, and you are being part of these conversations at each commission meeting. Resources are being shared with you, and the more that you can push that information out to your community and your network helps to spread the word, to get the messages out, and to let people know how they can be more engaged with the city as you are being. And with that, I would love to get your ideas about what else we can do to achieve more equitable engagement. So I will stop share and turn it back over to Molly.
Thank you so much, Kayla. This was really helpful. I think we have time for probably just 1 or 2 comments or questions, and then we will move along. And I think this is something that we might want to consider bringing back as more of a discussion item at a future meeting, so that we have a chance to sort of dig in a little bit more deeply about Transportation Commission's role. So if anyone wants to say anything now or ask a question, just raise hands. Okay. So then Councilmember Briggs. Sorry, yeah, I need you to actually.
That's okay. Just a quick, I have some thoughts that I'll share in later, but I got a couple of a text from somebody just on the community, on the public comment side of things. It appears that I don't know if it was just this individual having an issue or if it's more systematic. They had trouble calling them for public comment earlier. I know that's for the next issue. So I just thought that I might prompt them to try again, and maybe we might be able to listen to public comment if that's possible before we move on to the next agenda item.
Yeah, we definitely
has their hands raised.
Yeah, we have tried to return to folks because that is a challenge. Kayla, is there anyone there right now?
No one is currently there, but I'll keep an eye on it. But yes, that's great to hear. That it's not great to know that it didn't work well, but it's good to know that we can follow up and see if there's something that went wrong with that Zoom link. I hope not, but please try calling in again if for any public participants who'd like to make a comment.
Okay. Councilmember or Commissioner Balderrama.
Kayla, thank you for putting this together. It was definitely fascinating to see where Ann Arbor is right now, and like the direction that it seems like it will go on based on this type of work. I was wondering if there was any method or project that like really stood out in terms of like how creative they got and how they were, if there was like an organization that was a little bit more successful, and also removing like resources if there was one, because I imagine if you have like a massive budget then you could do a lot, but if there was any instances where you saw something that was a little bit more creative.
So from like other communities, like what I've seen, yeah. I feel like I've seen, there's a lot of cool things that are happening out there, but it's from a lot of communities that have a whole public engagement department, not just a couple of staff here and there. The Community Connectors program that I learned about for Boulder, I think that is really great because they are actually employing people to go out and do this work. And then community members that represent an underserved demographic are then attending public engagement events alongside city staff. And so at an event, just having that presence would may make other participants of that demographic feel more comfortable coming up to that table or coming to that meeting and sharing their feedback. So I thought that was really interesting. I think that what Minneapolis has, that dashboard, is really great. They have a dashboard to show community members, like, I don't know that if it's in real time or how often they're updating it, but kind of, I think it's some of these statistics that I sort of dropped in here for a snapshot of where we're at. They've got that more publicly accessible, like in dashboard format. I guess that's a little more detail on some that I had already mentioned, but there's a lot of great work. I mean, we're kind of just starting to do the research on what all is being done by other communities. So I think I'll continue to have more to share as we learn more about that. But There's so much out there. We just need the resources to do it and the time.
So thank you again, Kayla. This was really helpful. So we are going to keep moving, and we now invite Commissioner Hess to provide an update on healthy streets.
Raymond, we can see your screen, but we cannot hear you if you're speaking now.
There we go. I found the unmute button. Can you hear me now? All
Yes.
right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to give a very brief overview of where we're currently at with the Healthy Streets program for 2021. So just as a quick reminder in terms of timeline, this body recommended continuation of Healthy Streets back in December. That recommendation turned into a resolution that was considered by City Council and approved last month in January. And it provided kind of the seed money for design at $40,000. We are meeting with the consultant this week to finalize that design contract. And I think we finally have landed on a place where the scope matches the budget that we have. So I think that's good. The hope is that that design will go through a public engagement process and then ultimately go out to bid in March. And by public engagement, I mean to suggest that there's going to be kind of some concurrent processes going, that we're going to launch an online tool again and get feedback from the community while we're designing. It will be very iterative. And the target, which was set by this commission, is to bring something back to council for consideration in April. I will say the clock is ticking. We're trying our darndest to hit that April date, but it's a bit of an uphill challenge right now, given the fact that we still have to do design, put it out to bid, and then produce the resolutions for council's consideration, and ideally bring it back before you as well. So I'll go into kind of the different components of the Healthy Streets program and what we're currently thinking. The first is the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. So you may recall that last year's program included 26 local neighborhood streets, and we are suggesting to carry those forward. So through the public engagement process, what we would do is we would identify those from last year, allow people to kind of thumbs up or thumbs down it, and then also take any additional recommendations for new deployments via the online tool. We don't think that last year's deployment needs a lot of modification. These were pretty well received by the community, but we know there are some things that we've even discussed with this body about maybe some tweaks to the program, both in terms of signage and how much signage and things of that nature. So we are going to work with the design firm that we will have under contract to kind of think through that with us, and then also the transportation subcommittee also to get some recommendations in terms of what can be incorporated in modifications for the next round of deployment. Next, on major street reconfigurations, there are several different things that I want to highlight. The first is what we anticipate to be included. I will note that a lot of my language is caveated on these slides because there's still a lot to be determined. So you'll notice, like a good bureaucrat, up in the right-hand corner, I say subject to change. So stay tuned. I'll keep you posted as these things unfold. But what's anticipated to be included is Main Street from William to Stadium, as opposed to last year where the outside lane was taken away in each direction. We're anticipating more of a traditional sort of road diet configuration from 4 to 3. This would provide for a center turn lane, and I think would help with the operations of South Main Street, as well as providing a nice protected bike lane. East Packard, we are contemplating several different configurations. Last year, you may recall, we took that outside lane in both directions. There might be an opportunity to skinny the lanes down and put in bike lanes without having to take away lanes. There's also another option to look at like a cycle track option on one side of the street, bi-directional. So we're contemplating kind of all of the above, and we want to see which one is the most feasible. Packard, there was that one block of missing bike lane between State and Hill. We feel like the pilot was successful enough last year that we can go ahead and implement that as a permanent solution. So that's really just a restriping. So that'll fill a critical gap, and we expect that one to be permanent. And the other permanent installation is expected to be Division from Packard to Catherine. The DDA is looking to advance this as a permanent installation this year, similar to the 2020 configuration, meaning it would be bi-directional cycle track, similar to what you see pictured in here on the right of the screen, but with more permanent sort of protection and delineators, not temporary cones and barricades and bollards and things of that nature. I should also highlight what is not anticipated to be included. The first is the Broadway Bridge and kind of the Swift-Pontiac connection. There's several reasons for this. Broadway Bridge and several other bridges are going to go through some preventive maintenance this summer. So if there's active construction on the bridge, it's just not really going to lend itself to a Healthy Streets deployment. It also won't have a strong connection anymore since Division is only expected to go to Catherine. And you would have a missing link from the Broadway Bridge several blocks to the south before you get to Catherine. So that missing link also undermines the feasibility of it. Catherine Miller, the DDA is expecting to advance that for a future permanent installation, but due to capacity and budget and several other factors, we don't anticipate that one being done this calendar year, that it would hopefully maybe in 2022 be implemented. And similarly for North University and State, State was compromised a little bit with the weekend closures, not in a bad way, but there was kind of a competing kind of closure thing that was going on. And I think with the closures, weekend closures to support businesses, since those are anticipated to go on again, the North U and State connection isn't quite as vital until it becomes permanent in a future deployment, or at least that's the hope. A few other major, a few other considerations on the major street reconfigurations. So I already touched on it a little bit, but the online tool, we are looking to relaunch that. You may recall that there was a sort of online suggestion tool. It was a map that you could drop a pin. That pin would allow you to make recommendations about how the street could be used. We're going to broaden how that tool will be used to both accept sort of positive suggestions as well as kind of suggestions or opposition to a project, right? So those who may not want to see something will have an opportunity to use the tool in that fashion. That's not really how we constructed it last time, but we are making modifications to kind of get both sides of the coin on it this time around. Data collection is part of the design contract, so we are working with HRC, the design consultant, on our data collection strategy. We're going to collect some baseline data as well as some after implementation data. And so hopefully we'll just have some good background that we did last time as well, just to support what the use has been and chronicle that and document that. Obviously, the Transportation Commission has formed a subcommittee, and we want to engage them in that process. I know there's an upcoming meeting coming up shortly, and so we're going to, share information, get feedback from them, and share that with the design consultant. There might be other opportunities to have them attend staff meetings and other things as well. So some of that is still to be figured out, but we're excited about that collaboration. And then I also want to highlight that the deployment materials are expected to be different. What I mean by this is there was a lot of criticism last time about the kind of construction feel of Healthy Streets using cones and barrels and barricades. We are looking towards something that feels a little bit more appropriate for this deployment, most notably plastic delineators. So if you went on Division or parts of Miller Catherine, these are the smaller, thinner plastic, not cones, but delineator stanchions or bollards. We think those will be more positively received than the cones. Now, those might come at a higher cost, but we think they'll be better received by both users, vehicular users, as well as bicycles and pedestrians as well. I did skip over another point that I wanted to highlight. The equity-focused outreach is needed. We want to try to bolster that, especially based on Kayla's presentation. So it is something that hopefully the Transportation Commission can help us think through as well on that issue. And that is my update, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm going to ask you to unshare your screen. And again, I'll ask folks to physically raise hands, but thanks for that presentation, Raymond. That was really great. I'm gonna try and fix it.
All right, I am trying. My control panel has gone away for Zoom, so that's why I had difficulty unmuting myself.
I will ask a quick question while before I can see anyone else's hands. So I'm curious specifically about the State to Hill, the Packard from State to Hill, that little section, which it sounds like it's just a repainting issue. That used to be my commute back in the day when I got to commute places, and it's mostly pothole. That section of road is mostly pothole, and I'm wondering whether, like, I'm concerned that restriping is not going to address the sort of bigger issue along that section. Is there a plan to, like,
yeah,
potholes?
We did talk about that. You're absolutely right. That was my experience when I was biking the healthy streets this summer, and it is not scheduled for resurfacing in the very near future. So we will have to see if, there's some opportunity to kind of address some of those pavement issues. I think I saw earlier Molly Maciejewski was on the line. We can maybe see if some of those can be patched, pothole patch, but maybe there's some other opportunity there as well. So it's definitely, it's on our radar, and we'll look at it.
Okay, great. Other comments and questions? Okay. Oh, Commissioner Hadamaki.
Real quick, the Catherine Street treatment. So it's not going to be this year because we expect the DDA to do something in future years. But what about this year? I mean, I understand the excuse or the reason on division is that maybe in the summer or fall, there will be more permanent work done on division, which is great. But on Catherine, if there's nothing that's going to be planned for this year, then why not do the temporary healthy streets on Catherine?
Well, so the funny part is we were looking at doing a permanent deployment in discussions with DDA, but I think the timing and the funding just didn't pan out that was going to be feasible for this calendar year. And so I think what has happened is this one is kind of just being pushed out to a future year for a permanent. I guess we can open up the conversation about whether a temporary deployment is possible. It's not something we're kind of planning for at this moment, in part just because of the other logistics of getting the other ones up and running and going. We had deferred pretty heavily to DDA last time on that deployment, and I think they just have some bandwidth issues right now in terms of their ability to kind of execute multiple projects. And so I think that's ultimately where we're kind of landing on it. So I would say it's not entirely off the table, but it's something that we'd like to advance, but we don't know if we have the bandwidth to be able to advance it.
I'm really excited to see that some of these are becoming permanent and to see the changes in barriers to help with the issues that we had last year. That's all really great to see. I'll put in a plug for the Healthy Streets Committee, which meets tomorrow morning at 9. And if you want the Zoom information, just let us know and we can share it. Kayla, did you share it with the whole commission already?
It is now posted in Legistar.
Great. So yeah, we're going to be digging way more into Healthy Streets, and I'm really excited to see what this coming year's deployment is going to look like. So.
We do have a public comment
great.
Participant. So I see phone number ending in 483. If you would, I'm going to enable you to speak. And if you would like to make your comment, please do.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Lisa. And thanks for working to find the public commentary spot. I'm part of Snow Buddy, and you all received reports, roadmap reports from Snow Buddy, which is about maintaining winter sidewalks in their entirety, 365 days a year. And so just wanted to pop in to say I appreciate the person who did the public comment in the beginning to say they're excited to learn more about this. and to say that I've been part of a pilot in the Water Hill neighborhood for the last 7 years where we're clearing 12 miles of sidewalk of snow and ice in their entirety. And it's completely and absolutely transformational, right? Because any single unmaintained section of sidewalk is like like a link broken in a chain and makes it absolutely impassable to people with mobility issues. And so we have provided you all that you all received today via email and hard copy if you've requested it, a roadmap report. So we've been looking for the last 7 years about how do we actually deliver this in the city of Ann Arbor. We've been talking about this for decades, maybe decade at least, in terms of how do we provide a safe pedestrian corridor in the winter. And so this roadmap report outlines for you a funding options, delivery options, and governance options. And we've spent 7 years talking to you all and talking to folks in the community and colleagues and AATA, whose bus riders are pedestrians twice, and the Center for Independent Living, and this public schools, and all kinds of folks who walk and run and ride and push strollers and ride wheelchairs and use canes and to get around the city. And we feel like we as a community can do this. We've also talked to communities and been and visited communities who have been doing this. And we think that now is the time for us to make this happen. And we've got a roadmap report for you all, and happy to share more of that. And also know that I presented to you all, oh gosh, time is weird right now, 1.5 years ago, and said I'd be back with the roadmap report and do an official presentation. But just wanted to pop in now before this resolution is introduced around funding. So just to let you know that we're here for you. We want to help make this happen, and we're about safe pedestrian sidewalk transportation corridors in the winter, and let us know what we can do for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. That's great to hear. And yeah, the Snow Buddy report looks terrific. And yeah, there's a very good chance we'll be bringing you back at some point to hear more about it. So I guess this is our segue to talk about municipal sidewalk snow removal. And I'm going to hand it over to Councilmember Briggs to get us going.
Great. Thank you. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about why this resolution is coming forward tonight, and kind of whose input has been solicited and kind of the formation already, and then ultimately what we're looking for is feedback on how to improve it before it moves on to council for consideration in March. So not last night, but the meeting before that for City Council, there was a resolution that was brought forward looking at snow removal, kind of very more narrowly focused on snow that's comes onto the sidewalk by our snow plowing operation, blocks, crosswalks. And in that council discussion, one of the pieces that came forward is that, of course, there's a wide variety of interest about thinking about winter sidewalk access and addressing the many different associated problems beyond just kind of the problems presented by snow plows. And this is a good time of year to be talking about this, especially right after a big winter storm. We can all reflect on what's working well and what improvements we might be able to do. And then last night, there was another resolution that was brought to council by another council member that was focused in on just kind of very narrowly thinking about the downtown as well. So you'll notice that got linked as something to be thinking about during this discussion as well. But this resolution that we're asking for feedback on, Molly and I have been working on it for the last couple of weeks. We talked to city staff. We talked to the Snow Buddy folks who, right during this time period as well, released their report, which was super helpful. And so we're trying to make sure that we're kind of having a holistic discussion around the variety of different issues. So you'll notice in the resolution that's in front of us tonight, there is the first resolved clause really focuses in on thinking about what we might be able to do by doing a review of our current policies and procedures and figuring out how we might be able to improve them to create immediate change next winter. Then, and this is the idea that we would do this relatively rapidly and be coming back to Transportation Commission in July. The second one suggests that is really focused in on making sure that we truly understand the scope of our problem in our community. We all have kind of understand bits and pieces of it depending on what part of the community we're in, but we actually haven't studied this particularly systematically in our community to understand what solutions, if there may be different solutions that would work, different solutions for different parts of the city. So that would be next winter, since we don't really know how much more snow we're going to get this winter. Taking a more comprehensive look at that. And then finally, and this is where I've heard probably maybe the most community feedback around the kind of the timeline issue is by about this time next year, really taking a look and seeing if there are wholesale reforms that we might want to be doing to make sure that we have winter access to our sidewalks. And so that is really doing a deep dive into the work that kind of Snowbuddy has done, really taking a look at the data that we've collected, knowing we've already looked at our policies and procedures, and realizing at that point we should have a really good understanding of what we can do to ensure that folks have year-round access to our community via the sidewalk network. So that's kind of what the resolution is looking at. I would like to, in the kind of context of this discussion, just draw your attention to the resolution that was brought forward last night. I know we're not kind of formally talking about it, but that was really a request for a real deep immediate look at the Downtown Development Authority boundaries and looking at cost and feasibility of addressing sort of winter maintenance around our crosswalks downtown, specifically dealing with the issue of snow plows kind of making the downtown area inaccessible. So as you're looking and giving us feedback on how to move forward, think about it, is that incorporated appropriately within that? And also, just in general, what can we do to make this better? Does this feel on target? What are we missing? How do the, staff can answer questions around timeline? I guess I'll stop there. And Molly, if there's anything else you'd like to add?
Great. No, I think that about covers it. One option that we have is we can actually pull the resolution up, and so we can see the text on the screen, and Kayla can take some notes for us actually in the document if it's helpful. This is something we have done in the before times. So I thought this might be a good situation to do that now. We have about close to 15 minutes. I know we all have thoughts about snow removal. So I'd love to just hear what people are thinking about the status quo and also about this resolution. So physically raise hands and I'll start calling on folks. Commissioner Hadamaki.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm interested in timing. The resolution kind of treats next winter as a observe, and there might be immediate remedies that could be implemented this next winter, but any major efforts would be the winter of next, I guess it'd be 22 into 23. I know that was a kind of a criticism at the council meeting last night. So I wonder, is there room, given how long this has been a topic in our community, to move up, or maybe to not treat this next winter as more of an observation winter, but to try for major changes for the 21 to 22 winter? Is that even a possibility? But tied in with that, I wonder, is there an assumption that any all funding for any whatever idea comes forward, is it going to be required to have a millage? Do we need to think about elections and when the next millage opportunity would be? Does that need to happen before anything could even get off the ground?
Those are all really good questions. I don't know, Councilmember Briggs, if you have answers to any of those right now, or.
From my perspective, I think on the timing issue, I'd rather refer that a little bit to Mr. Hess to give some feedback around some of our constraints around that. So maybe I'll pass that over for some thoughts, some of those thoughts.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this last week or so, and I think, one of the points that was raised is we don't know how many more snow events are coming up this year to know the extent of the problem. And, I think there's several different pieces or suggestions of concentration or focus, right? So they're the sidewalks themselves, they're the crosswalks, they're kind of the gutter areas. There's even been discussion of, driveways and things like that. And I think knowing kind of what our focal point is, it will be helpful for the next snow event to know what we need to monitor, what we need to collect data on, what we need to do. I think, it's hard for me to say, and I see Molly Maciejewski's on the call as well. We don't have kind of the resources. We don't have an ordinance in place. We don't have several different things in place yet to know what can be possible as early as next year or as early as, as soon as possible. So I think that's kind of the circular argument we're in right now. Like, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we can address in the short term. And I think that's just one of the struggles we're at with this is we have, an ordinance on the books where adjacent property owners are responsible for it, but obviously that doesn't always work. And so, the speaker during public comment mentioned all it takes is just that one broken link in the chain for the whole thing to make a sidewalk impassable, especially if you're in a mobility device. So I think it's hard for us to quantify what the extent of the problem is and what the appropriate solution is until we monitor and collect data on it. And I know that's not a very satisfying answer. I wish it could be moved up. I don't know if there's a possibility for a smaller pilot area or something like that in the shorter term, but it is something that, we've kind of tried to wrap our heads around, and we haven't been able to come up with a good solution yet internally from staff's perspective.
Commissioner.
Oh, can I just add a little bit to that with the second part of the question? I think that's something that Commissioner Kleinman, Chair Kleinman, and I kind of debated too around just the pilot study aspect. We were debating how could that come into this. In some ways, we're not exactly sure what to ask for yet. Obviously, that is feedback that we could get here if there's a real desire to focus initially on, for example, the DDA, which has a lot of resources, a lot of the pieces there in terms of different a lot of different partnerships, a lot of different resources. Maybe it's an easier area to tackle some of the challenges down there if we're thinking about it systematically. Maybe there's a desire to really focus in on a transit corridor and see what impact changes might happen there. So in terms of what we need in terms of millage, I think if to some degree, I'm a little hesitant to jump right to a solution when we're not, we as the community haven't done the work to figure out exactly which problem it is that we want to address. We might decide when we get to the end of this process that we are, at least for phase one, maybe, or, if we think about this in phases, maybe we want to do everything in one lump sum, and that then it's perhaps bigger funding ask. But maybe we're thinking that we when we're doing assessment that some of our neighborhoods are actually doing, fairly well, and that certain strategies might improve that. But we really want to focus in along our major corridors and in our downtown, and then that's a different sort of funding need. So I think the amount of resources and changes that we're looking at, we don't have agreement around that yet.
Commissioner Felt.
I guess I do feel a bit more urgency than is reflected in the resolution. And it is something that I've personally been involved with since Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force, which is mentioned quite a bit in the Snow Buddy report, which I really appreciate. I think that there's a fundamental decision paradigm shift that we have to engage in first, which is that residential and business both sidewalk clearing should be done by the city or a city-based entity and not by individual homeowners or businesses. And I don't think we've gotten there as far as saying we're committed to this part. And I would really like to see us more do a resolution that says, hey, we've got to fundamentally shift how we approach snow removal for pedestrians in Ann Arbor, period. And then you get into the money question, but we haven't actually made that crossover yet. And there are other cities in northern states that are completely responsible, that do take this over completely. And they're mentioned in the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force report, or else in the appendices that we supplied with that. So I think that's the more fundamental, yes or no. And if we decide, and then you can break it down, because the task force decided, for example, that the dumping of snow from snowplows was one of the critical points to start with. And so we can figure out what the funding is for that, how to fund it, and we can put that into place for next winter. There's no reason to wait. It requires hiring vehicles and training people, and figuring out a few other details. That was all explored already by the task force. So I'm not in favor of doing feasibility or trying to figure out what the biggest problem is. I think that's all been documented. It's all there. But we just have to, hold our breath and say, yes, jump. The city should be responsible for this.
Thank you. Other comments? Commissioner Boland and then Parsons.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused about what needs to be observed in the year of observation. So is it that maybe some neighborhoods, we can save money because some neighborhoods don't need city involvement, and so we only would spend the money on neighborhoods that do need city involvement? I feel like we've had 7 years of Snow Buddy and Water Hill, and that's kind of a pilot that's already happened, and that we could learn from that and go on the recommendations of the Pedestrian Safety Committee. And I'm sort of with Linda Diane on this. I think we just need to jump.
Thank you. Commissioner Parsons.
Thanks all, and thanks for the time. I have been thinking about this a lot, and there's a couple things that I want to point out, and one is that sidewalks are vital transportation corridors, period. It's not recreational necessarily. It's just vital transportation corridors. Where my major concern is where these vital transportation corridors meet up with cars that are traveling at speed. So I have a little bit of hesitation doing a citywide, every sidewalk must be cleared by the city. But I absolutely think that every major transportation corridor sidewalk needs to be cleared by the city. And so we're talking arterials, we're talking about minor arterials, we're talking about just roads that have 7th Street, for instance, should be cleared on the sidewalks. Cars are going way too fast. The other thing I noticed after the snow event that we had, and I waited 24 hours to go out and observe, Packard, near where I live, you could see asphalt. The roads were cleared in amazing ways for cars, not so much for pedestrians. And in fact, as we were driving along, and I'll be honest, we were going on errands and sort of having fun in the snow, there was an African-American couple that was walking in the road because the sidewalk was impassable. That to me is just not acceptable. So if there's a way that we can quickly address the reality that our major corridors for cars and cyclists and pedestrians aren't being treated in the way that they need to be in a reasonably quick fashion, I would like to see that move quickly. When it comes to neighborhood snow removal, I think we can take our time a little bit and understand what that's going to take in terms of money and commitment. Snow Buddies has been an amazing pilot project. I don't know what it takes to make that happen citywide. I'm certainly interested in public-private partnerships, particularly with my background in volunteer service and making these sort of things happen. But we have a level of service that we have to address when it comes to city roadways and sidewalks. And so along these corridors where plows are pushing snow back toward the sidewalk and back onto curb ramps, that needs to be standard practice. These need to be cleared. There's no reason that a snow plow should push snow onto an already cleared curb ramp and somebody else has to come along and clean it off. We need to have these corridors open along our transit corridors, along our retail corridors, along our high population residential areas. And I think that has to happen as soon as we can. I don't think we need a super big feasibility study to understand that we have a problem, at least along these corridors, where high-speed vehicles and pedestrians connect.
Thank you. Commissioner Balderrama.
What are some challenges that's pushing it? I understand that they're with the Snow Buddy group that's been kind of like leading these efforts the last few years. What are some challenges or barriers to essentially like not taking their advice and implementing that for this upcoming year, and then having that kind of be like a pilot program and moving forward from there? It sounds like 7 years seems like a pretty thorough working group.
I would say the biggest, from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges right now is the fact that we are dealing with a COVID budget. Every department has been asked to make a 5% cut. The decisions that you make here around I think if the recommendation of Transportation Commission is that this is sort of the number one priority for next year, that's going to come at the cost of something else that is a priority. And so that is something that the commission needs to be fully aware of, that this is getting prior, and so part of it is the real challenges of acting quickly and swiftly at this moment in time. I think I would be personally feeling a lot more aggressive if my election had been 1 year sooner and I wasn't coming into a COVID budget. But I think if this is where sort of the emphasis is, I think that that's something that Mr. Hess is working on budgets right now. I guess there's a real need maybe for some feedback right now about could we do that?
Commissioner Felt.
Actually, I think that when I read the report, their conclusion was Snow Buddy would not work on a citywide basis. And their recommendation was against using that model, that pure model, citywide.
It was the volunteer model. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so they recommended a private-public partnership. They recommended against the city doing it and leading it, and rather they recommended towards contracting out with private entities to do snow removal.
My concern about the Snow Buddy report is that the project is all volunteers, and the people who assembled it are all volunteers, and they don't necessarily have familiarity with city contracting processes, hiring processes. Like there's a lot that I would love to understand better about the possible costs of sidewalk snow removal for the city, that I'm not confident that the Snow Buddy report, just because like by their own admission, this was a group of volunteers and they've been very successful in that small neighborhood. But we're sort of past the time that we had, but this seemed important. I want to try and summarize a little bit the consensus that I'm hearing, which is, first of all, that the status quo is not acceptable. Second of all, our sidewalks are critical transportation infrastructure and we need to treat them like it. Third, I'm hearing a sense of urgency about timing, that we really, as a commission, don't want to wait another full year to gather data before we at least make some steps and make some attempts to do city snow removal. Maybe that looks like a pilot. Maybe that looks like a pilot that's partly downtown to address the issues that came before council yesterday. I'm not sure. I don't know that we want to vote on this exact resolution, given that it sounds like the consensus of the commission is that there are some changes that we want to see. Perhaps we can vote on the general premise of municipal citywide snow removal and, in favor of the resolution with some revisions. I don't know what folks think about that. Yeah, Commissioner Boland.
So I think something along that lines is a good idea. I mean, the way that I understood Linda Diane, she can correct me if I'm wrong, but was that we need to make the decision that we're committed to this. And if we don't have enough in the budget to fully implement it, okay, but if we're committed to it, then we can start moving toward it as quickly as we can. Maybe adopting some of the priorities that Bradley suggested about the arterial roads, all of that makes sense, but we need to decide whether or not we're committed to it. And and by it, I'm not sure if we have to decide between the various options that Snow Buddy suggested. Those might not be the right options, but some kind of municipal
sidewalk.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me. So I'm going to propose a resolution. I'm going to talk slowly, Kayla, so hopefully you can catch what I'm saying. That the Transportation Commission endorses the goal of municipal sidewalk snow removal. Maybe that's the whole thing. And then we're going to go from there. We don't know, I don't know that we need to resolve about all the things we don't know. Yeah, Commissioner Felt.
I would like to see the implementation begun as soon as possible.
Yeah,
be put into there as well.
Great. So we Transportation Commission resolves that we endorse the goal of municipal sidewalk snow removal, and that we view this as an urgent need and a priority for city spending and planning. So given our time constraints, can I get a motion on that? I see Commissioner Hadamaki. Can I get a second? Commissioner Balderrama. Great. We have time for further discussion on that resolution. Or we can just vote on it. So I'm not seeing any more discussion. So all those in favor, raise your hands, please. All those opposed? Any abstentions? This resolution passes unanimously. Councilmember Briggs, do you feel like this gives you enough to go on for your revisions for what you're going to bring to council in March?
Yes, I think we are going to have to work together with staff to figure out what we can bring back.
Okay.
But yes, I get the message loud and clear.
Great.
thank you. It's really great to get this feedback.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. So we are going to move on to, Micromobility Committee. So this is going to be me and Commissioner Summers briefly providing an update on the work of the Micromobility Committee. I'm also going to give you a reminder because we haven't talked about this in over a year. So the Micromobility Committee's goal was to address the advent of scooters, basically e-scooters and also e-bikes, and sort of the diversifying range of mobility, personal mobility vehicles is what we've been calling them, that are not necessarily bicycles and they're not cars. They're not necessarily motorized in the way we think of a motor vehicle. And looking at revising our ordinances to make explicit space for those kinds of vehicles in our roadways and potentially in our sidewalks. And so Commissioner Summers, I don't know if you have anything to add to that brief summary. I'm going to try and really move us quickly into discussion.
I think you got it just fine, Molly.
Great, thank you. So you had in your packet an updated version of the ordinance. The big changes that you'll see are that everywhere that the existing ordinance talks about bicycles, we changed that to personal mobility vehicles. And then we also did a lot of work. A lot of the time that we spent was around attempting to define personal mobility vehicles in a way that would be broadly inclusive of things like e-bikes and cargo bikes and jitneys, while excluding mopeds and motorcycles. This has been through review with the city's legal department. We have with us a new assistant attorney, John Reiser, to answer any questions that folks have. So let's get right to it. Are there any questions or comments about the revisions? I see Commissioner Boland.
So my question has to do with the definition. It says no more than 2 persons abreast. And so is that intended to include things like golf carts?
Yes, I think that there's this potential future of small electric vehicles that are sort of in the golf cart family. The other reason we wanted to include 2 abreast is, for example, a lot of family cargo bikes like the Bachfeets, the passengers are riding side by side. They're usually smaller humans that are riding side by side, but they're still 2 abreast. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't accidentally banning those kinds of vehicles.
I guess I wondered if there needs to be, since the ordinance says that they're allowed on sidewalks, I was wondering if there needs to be some width limitations so that, you know, a pedestrian going the other direction can fit on the sidewalk with them.
Yeah, we did talk about that. And I think the solution that we came to was, rather than trying to control the vehicles, controlling the behavior of those vehicles, so that if they're on the sidewalk, they are required to yield to pedestrians. And that was our attempt to stay flexible in defining the vehicle and address the problem of sharing pedestrian space.
Thanks.
Thanks. Commissioner Hadamaki.
Yeah, thank you. So my question comes from that. I see I'm looking at the version with change tracking turned on, and in section 10(147), what was section 1 was deleted, where it did say that person operating a personal mobility vehicle on a sidewalk shall yield right of way to pedestrians. So that whole section was deleted. Was it replaced with something effectively the same? Because I didn't see it.
John, maybe you can address that. I have to, now I have way too many tabs open as usual. I thought that had stayed in there in some version, but I could be mistaken.
Raymond, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when I got it, that had been lined through. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think where we meant to address the issue was the willful disregard through the 10(147)(3). Person operating a personal mobility vehicle on a sidewalk shall not operate with willful disregard for the safety of persons or property and shall not exceed a speed of 10 miles per hour. So I think maybe there was a thought that yielding away is a function of this willful disregard and operating at a safe speed on the sidewalk.
The other thing I would add is that we had a note that that was direct language from the motor vehicle code. And at one point in our discussion, we had decided that we did not need to reiterate language that was verbatim from motor vehicle code.
So that requirement already exists, is what you're saying?
Yeah, right. So we had a note that it's from an older version of feedback from a prior city attorney on June 20th of 2019, where it was stated that this is in the Michigan Vehicle Code word for word. And so I think it was after, I mean, I have to dig through this a little more, but from a quick look, I think it was after that feedback that we did strike that language. But I think we did end up with some, since then we've ended up with some language that does replicate what's in the motor vehicle code, and we wanted to emphasize that. So I don't know that that's a reason not to include it, but I do think that was the rationale at the time.
Okay. I would be open. I would be happy to bring that language back, because I do think it's a useful reminder. Not that we have tons of people reading the code, but it's nice to have it articulated in there. Other comments or questions? Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I would suggest that might be good language to bring back. I'm a little skeptical that from an enforcement perspective, willful disregard for the safety of persons is going to be, I think there's a lot of obliviousness rather than willful disregard that can happen. And yeah, being somebody who moves 10 miles an hour is relatively fast for me. So it seems, I'd like to see regulation of our sidewalks to make sure that's a safe environment.
Great. Yeah, so I'm happy to add that back in. Any other? Great. So the action item here then would be to pass a resolution recommending that City Council pass this ordinance. I'm going to say that we recommend it with the return of that language about yielding to pedestrians. So, go ahead.
Can I bring up something as well you guys might want to give some thoughts about too? And that's when it comes to enforcement by the police or community standards, but probably the police. And the standard that you're setting forth in 3 is that a person operating a personal mobility vehicle on a sidewalk shall not operate with willful disregard for the safety of persons or property and shall not exceed a speed of 10 miles an hour. So do you mean to say that if you drive in willful disregard, but at 9 miles an hour, it's okay? So should that be an and, or should that be an or?
We talked a lot about whether or not there should be a speed limit at all. Jim, Commissioner Summers, do you have any thoughts or recollections about that?
I do. I mean, I actually projected differing speed limits on sidewalks in different places. 10 miles per hour is awfully fast on a sidewalk downtown, but at 15 miles per hour is fine on a sidewalk out along Packard if you decide you need to ride on a sidewalk. So yeah, it's a little tough, and I guess it's all about what we're willing to do as far as, communication to whoever using the sidewalk. I suggested speed limit signs and things like that, but I guess it's outside of the scope of what's possible. In town, if you're talking about a sidewalk on Main Street, 7 miles per hour is very fast. 4.5 is probably more what you need to see on that sidewalk, just based on my own experience on what I feel comfortable with doing.
So, yeah. So thank you. I'm trying to remember, Commissioner Hess, do you remember I really thought we decided not to do speed limits.
Well, I think, yeah, so we had initially discussed 7 miles per hour, and I think the initial thought was behind that was like a jogging speed, not as fast as I jog, because I don't jog. My jogging speed is like 0 miles per hour, but so I think that felt a little too slow for, again, I think Commissioner Summers brings up a good point that, not all sidewalks are created equal and maybe feel different in different locations. But the reason why we, I think, opted not to pursue the designated speed limit on sidewalks is it would just become unwieldy, right? Because every sidewalk would then need a posted speed limit, and how do you post it? How do you enforce it? And it just becomes, so I think 10 miles per hour was just kind of meant to be that sort of compromise speed that, yes, it's probably too fast downtown, and maybe it's not fast enough on, the Fringe or on Packard or, places that are maybe not like downtown, but it was meant to capture at least enough of the concerns. And, 10 miles per hour is kind of meant to be, while it's maybe not ideal that someone's going 10 miles per hour next to someone who's walking at 3 miles per hour, it's better than 15 miles per hour or 20 miles per hour, something like that. So, to Commissioner Kleinman's point, I think all of this speaks to these kind of mixing modalities on a confined space, and how do we regulate that, right? Where and how they can operate. And we talked about, size of vehicle that we've already talked about. We've talked about carrying capacity of vehicles. We talked about whether it's electric. We talked about wheel size. We talked about all these different things. And I think this speed thing was the best option, maybe not in the eyes of everybody, but I think that's kind of where we landed. I don't know if it makes people happy, but that's kind of where we landed.
Okay, my concern about speed limits then and now is about opening things up to unequal enforcement. If we create a situation where someone is riding in a safe and non-disregarding way at 13 miles an hour in an area without pedestrians, I thought that then is going to open them up to a stop or to ticketing because they're technically in violation of the ordinance. And that's a concern that I have about putting a speed limit on there. And I would hope that these other, requiring people yield, requiring, concern for safety would be sufficient to adapt to different settings rather than having a speed limit. But I know we're low on time. I'm going to open it back up because I see a couple of hands. So Commissioner Hadamaki and then Summers.
Yeah, quickly, I just want to push back against the idea of having a speed limit based on what you just said and others, especially because personal mobility vehicles aren't required to have speedometers. I would even wonder what tiny percentage of these vehicles do have speedometers. So it's really hard to enforce and legislate on something that people are completely unaware. Speed limits on roads are different because cars are legally required to have speedometers, but personal mobility vehicles don't. So I don't know how you're going to stop or interrogate someone when they don't even have a speedometer on their vehicle.
Yeah. Commissioner Summers.
Okay, so Doug kind of bring me right back to a very good point, that not all these devices have speedometers. And it actually comes back to personal responsibility. And I'm not exactly sure how to articulate that into a law or ordinance. What I have personally observed are that scooters seem to be moving very fast on sidewalks. People that are operating bikes and cargo bikes, I haven't actually witnessed anything myself that throws up a red flag. The scooters are the only thing that have thrown up a red flag to me around the city. I have regularly observed people moving 15 miles per hour down a sidewalk in front of businesses. And I don't, maybe we look at data coming into the hospital to see what, injuries are resulting from things like that. But yeah, I honestly would probably push back if there has to be a speed limit, that I would push back against that speed limit and just, if it can't be, some type of awareness in order to keep people from moving that fast downtown. Yeah, if there's no way to narrow it, and then I would actually vote for no speed limit myself.
Okay, so then I'm going to suggest we make a second adjustment to the resolution, to the ordinance. So we talked about bringing back the requirement to yield to pedestrians and striking the speed limit. So, and I know we have at least one commissioner who needs to leave at 9, so I'd love to get this to a vote in the next 3 minutes. Commissioner Hess, it looks like you had something you wanted to bring back.
I do want to just raise a safety concern. If there are no speed limits on sidewalks, it's generally acknowledged that fast-moving vehicles on sidewalks are sometimes prone to more serious crashes, especially if they're running contraflow to, if someone's pulling out of a driveway and this is a design standard for side paths versus bike lanes, and I just want us to be a little cautious about how we proceed on opening up sidewalks to.
Do we have a speed limit for the sidewalks now?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
In theory, no motorized vehicles allowed on sidewalks.
Oh,
so
right.
I think that this allows motorized vehicle because we're broadening the definition.
Right.
So that's, an e-bike that can go 30 miles per hour on a sidewalk going the wrong way, that makes me nervous.
Yeah, it makes me nervous too. That vehicle probably doesn't belong on the sidewalk. I just don't know that. I don't know that this ordinance is going to change that behavior. Commissioner Parsons.
I was just going to say that I don't think I'm comfortable voting on this yet. I think that we need another meeting for it. Two things come to mind. I would love to hear Lieutenant Sherba's thoughts about enforcement when it comes to these regulations. And the other thing that popped into my mind is that in the motor vehicle code, there's also a duty of care that is at the center of what it means to drive a motor vehicle. And maybe that's a way to get around willful negligence and a speed limit, is that you have a duty of care when you operate a vehicle like this. So I'd welcome exploring those if folks are okay with that.
I mean, we've waited on this a year. I think we can give it another month. So let's plan to look into those things. And Lieutenant Sherba, maybe you can bring some of that information to us next month. That way you'll have a little time to plan and think about it. Does that work?
It does. I was actually going to chime in a little bit, but some of the commission members hit some of the points that I was already going to make about enforcement and how are we going to tell if it's over whatever speed limit is chosen and things like that. So I would view it as almost unenforceable, any speed, no matter what it was. So I would have to see language that would be indicative of behavior that was prohibited, and whether that's disregard for the safety of persons or property, or whatever the language may be. That John Reiser probably can come up with something pretty good that could be defensible, would help us a lot, because like I said, it's really not reasonable or practical to try to do any kind of enforcement on a numeric speed. We're not going to walk down this sidewalk with a radar or a LiDAR trying to see how fast the scooter's going. So just a couple of thoughts, but yeah, I can absolutely talk more about it next time.
Thank you. John, I see your hand raised, but what I was going to maybe suggest is that the micromobility committee, make a few more rounds of edits on this and bring it back next month for reconsideration with these.
Thank you.
Talked about. Okay, great. So that's the plan for this. We're not going to vote on anything tonight. And I'm going to move us on to the staff report and updates with Raymond Hess. So you got a staff report in the agenda materials, and we're going to get some highlights.
Yeah, I'll go through this very quickly. There really haven't been a lot of changes from last month to this month, just because we're kind of in the doldrums of winter. So sidewalk gaps, Manchester Drive was removed. It'll be programmed for a later year. Lane reconfigurations, there's some language about South Industrial and inclusion of a bike lane as part of the reconfiguration. Public engagement is expected to occur in March. There's some language about City Council removing the requirement for their approval on road reconfigurations. Ashley Streets is expected to begin in February. People-Friendly Streets Part 2 is going to start public engagement March 9th, 10th, and 11th, so keep an eye out for that. Healthy Streets we talked about quite a bit tonight, so I won't go into that. The EV Readiness Ordinance was passed on January 19th, and the last thing in the report talks about Smart Growth America's COVID and the CURB report that we were a peer agency on. That report's available online, and you can look that up. That's it.
Great, thank you so much. Yes.
Can I chime in with one other staff update? So the Transportation Master Plan, the A2 Moving Together Towards Vision Zero plan, is nearing the time when there'll be final presentation and commission action. And staff have been discussing the possibility of a joint work session between Transportation Commission and Planning Commission to receive that final presentation and take action. And that would take place in mid-April. So that is currently being discussed, and we are likely going to pursue that, but we do want to get some commissioner feedback. So in general, we're not going to discuss it here tonight, but I'd love for you to email me and share your feedback in regard to the idea of a joint work session, but also about how that will impact our regular meeting schedule. Would we be interested in holding our regular Transportation Commission meeting in April in addition to the joint work session, which would mean there would be two meetings for you to attend that month? Or if we do not hold a regular Transportation Commission meeting in April, then we would need to expect that the March and May agendas will probably run longer than the 2 hours that we try to stay within. So please give some thought to that. Shoot me an email or give me a phone call. I'd be happy to chat and hear your feedback about the logistics of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kayla. So next up, we have liaison reports. Any commissioners who specifically serve as a liaison to another body or organization are invited to provide brief updates and reports.
Yeah, Tim Ho, representing Commission on Disability Issues. I know that this commission brought to our attention that we had never expressed an opinion on the white cane law thing, and I guess we thought we had, and somehow it slipped through the cracks. We didn't hold a formal vote, but we did. We went ahead and just made a motion and approved it, saying that we didn't see any issues with that moving from the traffic code to the vehicle code. And yeah, so that was done at today's meeting. And yeah, we also received the same report from Snow Buddy that this commission did, and we're definitely also interested in the whole sidewalk snow removal thing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah.
And also the RTA Citizens Advisory Committee is holding its first meeting. That would be next Monday. Just thought you might be interested in that.
Great. Yeah, we heard about the RTA a while back. Any other liaison reports? Yes, Commissioner Smith.
Good evening. Just very briefly, just wanted to announce that the ride is embarking on a public input process that we had promised last year when we had to reduce service due to COVID. And beginning at the end of this month, we're going to be announcing a series of online public events to show what the proposed service for this August is and to get feedback on that proposal. And I will be able to present that proposed service increase to the commission at the next commission meeting, time permitting.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, yep, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, this is just sort of doubling up on what Commissioner Hull mentioned, but I serve as liaison on Watts as well. And there was quite an extensive presentation today around the RTA, Regional Master Transit Plan. And just so folks are aware, there is on their website a briefing book that if folks haven't seen, you might want to go check out. And the focus of the Watts committee meeting was really getting our input on the investment in commuter rail in Washtenaw County, which would take up about, which is kind of proposed in their plan. That would be about 52% of the investment in Washtenaw County would be focused on the commuter rail, potentially between Ann Arbor and Detroit, maybe as far as Chelsea. And we discussed, there was a very interesting letter from the ride around kind of concerns around that, but there's going to be, on what we basically asked for was more additional alternative projects and approaches that could be considered in addition to the commuter rail. So just wanted to give you an update on that.
Thank you. Yay, commuter rail. I almost said computer rail. It's a long day. All right. Any other, general commission member reports. So all commissioners are invited to provide reports and updates. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So call for agenda items. I'm just going to request that if you have agenda items for coming months to please email them to me and Kayla, and we will figure out the schedule for them. It sounds like there are a couple that have come up over the course of this evening's meeting. And let's see here. If there are no objections, I'm looking for objections, we will adjourn tonight's meeting. So seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone. I'll try not to do this to us again with the agenda. We'll make it